The next selection from a memoir by Willard F. Mueller. Willard served as the Vilas Professor of Economics at the UW-Madison, and he also served in the administrations of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. He remains an emeritus professor at the university, and he is a member of this congregation. Willard spent a portion of his early childhood in Wausau, Wisconsin, the site of the memories that follow. We always had white Christmases in the 1940s, and the big event was Christmas Eve. The evening always began with a special Christmas Eve service at Trinity Lutheran Church, at which various school classes sang favorite Christmas carols. And at the end of the services, all the classes assembled in their respective classrooms at the nearby Trinity Lutheran School, where everybody received a basket of goodies consisting mainly of fruit and candy. And after receiving our baskets, everyone eagerly headed for home. My mother would have preceded me and placed our gifts under the Christmas tree. The first few years in Wausau, our Christmas tree was brightened with wax candles, a real fire hazard. But after Mom began working at Marathon Motors in 1935, she bought a couple of strings of electric lights, considered something of a luxury back then. My most poignant Christmas memories are of running the 10 blocks from Trinity Lutheran to our house at 527 North 4th Avenue. I don't recall ever being bothered by the cold as I hustled home. I wore long underwear and galoshes, pull-over stocking cap, a big shawl around my neck that I could pull over my face, and a heavy winter wool coat that my Uncle Ted had sent to me. Although I'm sure it didn't happen every year, I do remember running home one night, or more likely skipping along as I often did, while the snow drifted slowly down beneath the street lamps at the intersection of each block. It was, I remember, an awesome, beautiful sight. When I got home, I hustled to the Christmas tree around which my mom and Lothar and Grandpa had gathered in anticipation of my arrival. The gifts were modest, but Mom always seemed to have surprises for everyone. And there were gifts there from other relatives, and especially from our generous aunts in St. Paul, Gertrude and Frida. Their packages always included a silver dollar for my brother and me. It was a rich and joyous evening, and the hardship of the Depression years did nothing to dampen our joy, demonstrating that gratitude is largely a matter of expectations. Today, I can only recall one gift that I was given: an unassembled aircraft set consisting of balsam pieces used to build the plane's frame, around which I pasted thin tissue paper. Its propeller was driven by a wind-up rubber band, and although I never did succeed in getting it to fly, for several years I proudly hung that model airplane from a string tied to the ceiling light bulb fixture in my bedroom. And then the second selection in a similar vein, from George Vukelich. And many people here would remember George as a columnist for the Capital Times and then later the Isthmus, and also the author of a collection called North Country Notebooks. We were no more than 4 or 5 when we started going up to Frankie Mern's attic. Frankie's attic was a treasure house of toys that he had received at Christmas over the years. They had been lovingly collected and kept by his doting parents, who had come from the old country and were raising their son in the new country, the country called West Allis, Wisconsin. Up in Frankie's attic, there were toys all over. I always thought that Santa's workshop must look something like this. No, not his workshop, one of Santa's warehouses. Toys everywhere. Later in life, I saw Orson Welles' magnificent movie, Citizen Kane. And when the camera was panning that endless cram-jammed warehouse stuffed full of a lifetime of treasures, my first thought was, Frankie's attic at Christmas time. Frankie's attic was stuffed to the rafters with Frankie's toys, boys' toys. And that's because Frankie was an only child, and he only got boys' toys. There were tricycles, two-wheelers, coaster wagons, big little books, wind-up freight trains and wind-up passenger trains with boxes of silvery track sections. There were racing cars with rubber bodies and little metal monoplanes with silver wings and red bodies, and all the little monoplanes had little metal propellers that you could spin and rubber wheels on the landing gear that really turned. And there were ice skates, shoe skates with racing blades, and there were clamp-on ice skates and roller skates too. Frankie's wooden skis were in a corner, along with an old Westclock's pocket watch that didn't work anymore. It was funny that there were so many toys because frankly, was an only child. And yet there were more toys in that attic than you could find in the whole block of houses in that factory neighborhood around 69th and Greenfield Streets. Now, one time or another, Frankie and I, we looked at and we held, if only for a moment, each and every one of Frankie's toys. But the only ones we really seriously played with were his lead soldiers. We played war. The little lead soldiers were from the armies that had fought in the Great War. World War I, it would later be called, when there had been a World War II. And the soldiers were painted in the uniforms of Germany and France and England and the United States. Neither of us really wanted to have German soldiers on our side, and so sometimes we would line up all the soldiers in battle lines, and after we had lined them all up, we would have only British and French and American soldiers, and there would be the German soldiers still in their boxes, off to one side, off by themselves, shunned, unwanted. And we played war. We played war with these little lead soldiers that today are worth a fortune to antique collectors, who probably today would have them in a room under glass where the dust can't touch them, where they're always upright, where they're never felled by shots from enemy armies commanded by little boys in army field caps. Little boys yelling commands, filling the air with pows and bangs and the boom, boom of heavy artillery. And so one Christmas time in Frankie's attic, we were yelling and we were shouting and we were screeching at each other, even banging the floor, and suddenly Frankie's mother opens the attic door, comes halfway up the stairs, staring at us, asking Frankie, "Is everything all right? Are you boys fighting?" And later, Frankie told his mother that we weren't really fighting, we're just playing war because it sounded like we were fighting downstairs. And once she realized that we were only playing war, she never came up those attic stairs again. She would only open the door and call up the stairs, "Generals, we have cookies and cocoa in the kitchen when your war is over." And then she would close the door again. But then, with that announcement, in a flash, the arms of the generals would sweep forward like Siths in a last all-and-out attack. And we would cut down the enemy infantry like wheat and like grass, and down, down, down the lead soldiers would go, tumbling, stumbling in a jumble of metal and colors and battle flags. And it was all so real that you could smell the gunflower and the burning flesh. And you could still hear the ringing of the shot and the shells long after the guns had fallen silent. And after some of those battles, a terrible silence would hang over the dusty battlefield, and the only soldiers left standing, left surviving amid the battle junk and the carnage, would be the two rival commanders. Frankie and I would stare at each other, and I don't know about Frankie, but I felt we were both as bloodied and as wounded as our fallen troops. I felt that there was a loss in both of us that was not to be spoken about. A loss, nonetheless, that we shared without speaking a word. We put the soldiers away, and we were very quiet, and it was like we were burying them in their little boxes. And when we were done, you would never know that a great battle had been fought there, fought in that attic, fought to the death. And then we went down the attic stairs into the bright glow of peacetime, to peace on earth, where steaming cocoa and Mrs. Mern's warm Christmas cookies awaited. And she would ask us, "How did the Great War turn out?" And Frankie said, "No one has won yet. There has been a Christmas truce."